Here, glad that we can be with you. Let me make sure this is really quite okay. It's really great to have you here. It's not often that we get to spend some time to really dig deep into data and evaluation, and particularly the concepts of evaluation. So that's what we're going to be talking about and learning about today. And it's valuable and relevant for all grantees and for every step of the strategic prevention framework. We'd love to see you on camera. And I want you to also feel free to ask questions as we go along, rather than saving them. Go ahead and put your question in the chat. We have Linda Weldon and Heather monitoring chat for us and can help us answer questions as we go, because we do have a full day, full part of the day ahead. So with that in mind, I need to see here. Are you seeing the agenda? I can't see anyone. So just somebody tell me.
We are. Yes, we are
Okay,
seeing the
great.
agenda.
Okay, perfect. So we're going to talk about the principles of evaluation, some foundational concepts for you to know. And then we're going to talk about the actual evaluation questions used for this KPCCI grant process. We're going to also talk about block grant priorities and some new information that we're excited to share with you there, and national outcome measures, and how what you're doing really helps to inform Congress about prevention. We'll talk about some different data sources, CCB, process and outcome data measures, understanding your data, and then also the importance and some ideas on how to share your data. So as we talk about evaluation, what are we really talking about? We're talking about, and there's several, I'll let you read this, but there's several words here that I think we want to point out that really stick out or stand out. The first word to me is systematic. It's not something random, it is something planned and a systematic method for going through. And then there's that whole collection there of words of collecting, analyzing, and using data. So that is part of the method or process of evaluation. And I'll stress the part here about using data. Data doesn't do any good if we're not using it to inform decisions, and it doesn't do any good if we're not monitoring it, and if we're not evaluating it and having us make continuous improvement. And the last part of the definition I really wanted to stress was the idea of using data for continuous and ongoing improvement. Next slide. Okay. So many people think that evaluation is something you do at the end of a project. You do a project and you say, well, how did we do? Well, then it's kind of too late at the end of the project to figure out how you did. You really need to be looking at evaluation and planning for it from the very beginning. And that's why for our new planning grantees particularly, we're having this training early in your process, because we want you to be thinking about monitoring and evaluation from the very beginning and planning for that. So why is this important? Let's see if I can do my animation. There we go. First of all, it informs decision-making. Evaluation informs decision-making. It tells you what's working, what's not working, and what needs improvement. It also helps you create a record. It helps to tell your story, what your processes were, what your highlights, helps you engage your community, and all of that is really, really important for sustaining your efforts and what you're doing. Being able to tell your story to others to help them understand why what you're doing is important. That helps you to sustain your work over time. And then finally, it maintains accountability simply. As a grantee, you're accountable to KDADS as your funder. And we'll talk about this a little bit more, but KDADS is also accountable to SAMHSA as their funder. And SAMHSA is held accountable to Congress, which is all of our funders. So evaluation helps to keep you accountable. It helps you to identify contributors, action plans, and also then leads to increased sustainability. Okay, so standards of a good evaluation. So this is just some foundational background. There are a set of 30 standards, and evaluation is a whole discipline, and there's a whole set of standards that assess the quality of evaluation activities and determine whether the activities were well designed and working to their potential. And this is something adopted by educational evaluation, other evaluation. These standards are set to answer the question, will this evaluation be effective? And we really don't need to go into all 30 standards for you to have a good foundation understanding evaluation. Just kind of the key groups that they're organized into. And the first one of that is utility. There are utility standards, and that ensures that evaluation will serve information needs of the intended users. Basically, is it useful? Does it have utility? Is it something that's going to be useful? Second is feasibility, which is just what it sounds like. It ensures that evaluation will be realistic, that it's prudent, diplomatic, and frugal. Is it cost effective? Is it feasible to do given the resources that it requires? Proprietary standards ensures that evaluation will be conducted legally, ethically, and with regard to those involved. If you're involving other people, you want to make sure that you're protecting their rights, as well as what will be affected by the results. So proprietary. This is where if you were working with people, you might need to have informed consent. If we're working with youth, we need to get informed consent from parents. Seeking approval from a review board might be part of that process. And then finally, there's accuracy standards. This ensures that evaluation will really convey technically accurate information about the features that determine worth or merit of the program being evaluated. So in other words, does it produce and convey accurate information that will be of benefit? So the steps and standards are used together through the whole evaluation process. And there are certain steps that you need to take to complete what we call a meaningful evaluation. And by meaningful, I mean program evaluation that has a function and a purpose. Okay. So you can see it's kind of blocked into certain steps here. The first thing you do, as you can see along the top there in that orange, is to engage your stakeholders. This runs across the top because this is an important part of evaluation from the beginning to the very end. You start an evaluation by identifying who your stakeholders are, and you create a plan for their involvement, which includes ways for them to provide input. And stakeholders really are your key. It can make or break what you're doing. So that's important. So once we have people engaged, you have your stakeholders engaged, the next step is to focus the evaluation. So define the purpose, the target population, determine the key evaluation questions, or in other words, what it is you want to learn from what you're doing, and describe programs and strategies. This also includes setting objectives. So once you have you've engaged your stakeholders, you've focused your evaluation, then you're going to start collecting data. And the data collection plan includes sources of data, when the data will be collected, what measures will be used, how often it will be collected, and who's responsible for ensuring it will be collected. And a lot of that information is going to be documented into your strategy action plans or your implementation action plans once you get there. So once your plan is in place, then it's time to implement strategies and collect your data. Then that third purple column, you see, once you have data, you have to analyze and interpret what's collected. You need to understand what the data means and what you learned or gained from implementing the strategies. So that's part of the data monitoring and continuous improvement process. You can look at graphs, compare trends. This is where you'll work with your support team, and you'll work with the KPC Evaluation Team, which I should have mentioned from the beginning. We have evaluators at Greenbush, and we have evaluation team from the University of Kansas Center for Community Health and Development that you'll hear throughout the day today that are part of this team that can help you with this process of understanding your data. And then also knowing about what the limitations of the data are. We know what it can do, but what can't it tell us? And then the final step is really one of also a very important step, is you have to use data. You have to share your findings and your lessons learned. Get your message out, tell your story. Use the data to get people excited about what you're doing in your community. As I mentioned earlier, this helps with sustainability. It can inform planning and new policy development. We're going to be talking about that a little bit later. So again, this will give you some specifics for the KPCCI grant, but just understand this is kind of the process or the framework for a meaningful, comprehensive program evaluation. I think now I turn it over to Dola. So Dola, if you want me to advance slides, I can, or if you'd like me to stop sharing and have you advance, either way.
No, that would be great, Lisa, if you would advance the slide.
Sure.
Thank you.
Happy to.
I have to take a break. So good morning, everyone. I think most of you know my name is Dola Williams, and I am the program coordinator at KU Center for Community Health and Development, and we are, of course, part of the evaluation team with Greenbush. And if you're thinking about, why would you need two different evaluators? And that is because from Greenbush, sorry, you receive the outcome data, and then when you're entering your accomplishments into the CCB based on what the outcomes of your community are, then we process we are the data in the CCB then gives you what the process is. We evaluate that process. So that's the difference between the process and outcome data as it relates to KU and Greenbush. If you would go to the next slide, Lisa. And I don't know if anyone has said it, but if there are any questions or anything while we're presenting, you can use the chat or raise your hand. We're very happy to have a conversation and not just be talking at you. But here's another slide that talks about our process evaluation questions. So what evidence-based strategies were implemented by funded communities? And some of you most all of you are already implementing in some way. That implementation transfers into the CCB. So actually, whatever activities you're doing throughout the SPIF phase will be entered into the community checkbox. The first one being the evidence, well, not the first one, but the first one on this slide, then the evidence-based strategies, and then how many people were reached or served by each strategy implemented. You'll see later on when we get to the specific CCB slides, we'll talk in depth about participant description. Then was the capacity of community coalitions improved? And that's what Lisa was mentioning in the previous slide, meaningful program evaluation. So we're not just doing work in the community, and we are doing great work. We are having a good time, but we do need to have that reporting data with fidelity. Lisa talked about all of the different places that we are responsible to report that data and how important we can't do it without you, right? It starts with you. And so that's important for your community coalition's improvement. And then were selected strategies and action plans implemented fully and with fidelity. So you'll hear us throughout the day going back to your action plan, and your logic model that those are the guiding documents that keep us on track for what we're entering into the CCB and that we're doing it with fidelity. So thank you, Lisa. These are our outcome evaluation questions. How did implementation of strategies result in changes in participation outcomes related to targeted risk factors and youth substance abuse? And so this is the data that Greenbush provides based on your pre and post data. I won't read all of those to you. You'll also receive that information from your KCTC community and county trend data, and then your KCT measures compared to state. And so all of that are not just processes that you go through. We actually you'll hear us referring back to everything that you've done in your assessment period to bring you up to the place of, was your implementation successful or not? Or not whether maybe or not, but what was the process? What were the outcomes that you reached along the way? Anything you want to add to that, Lisa?
Yeah, just that yeah, these work together, like Dola said, the process data from the community checkbox and the outcome data from KCTC. They work together to tell your story, but that these are the actual evaluation questions that our team uses that we use this data that you're providing is to answer these questions, which we have to give to KDADs and tell them as a group, how is your group, how are these grantees doing? How are the KPC grantees doing? So that's why your documentation is so important. And we'll say that several times today too. And this outcome data is important because we can't answer these questions for KDADs without good data, just like you need good data to make good decisions too. So these are the actual questions that we're held accountable for to report. So along those same lines, thank you, Dola.
You're fine.
So with that, and we're talking a little bit about accountability, part of what we'll talk about is the funding and where it comes from and why, again, the data collection is required. SAMHSA provides block grant data to be used, and there's a number of different things you'll see here in relation to, but I'll point you more to number 3, to fund primary prevention, universal selected and indicated prevention activities and services for persons not identified as needing SUD treatment. So in other words, to do primary prevention, they're giving us funds as a state to do that. And number 4, to collect performance and outcome data to determine the ongoing effectiveness of promotion, substance use disorder prevention, treatment and recovery services, to plan new services. So we don't talk a lot with grantees, or we haven't in the past. I think it's important that we do. We haven't talked a lot about block grant and what that means. So here's a diagram that maybe can help. So block grant or other funding from the federal government or from SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse Mental Health Service Administration, is given to states for substance use treatment, prevention, and recovery. For prevention, so the funding is coming down to do the work. For prevention, then the state in turn gives money to communities. I'm sorry, back here, we're jumping ahead. So funding comes from SAMHSA to the states in turn give it to communities to plan and implement substance use prevention strategies. But there's an accountability piece to this process. Communities then have to demonstrate that they're doing the work intended and are producing the desired outcomes. So that's where we see this roll back up. Community process and outcome data are reported to the state, back to the state, which in turn then is reported back to SAMHSA. And then ultimately SAMHSA reports the community and state processes and outcomes to Congress to determine whether the federal government should continue to fund these efforts. So your data and evaluation is important. It helps show Congress that community prevention efforts work, that prevention really can work. So some of the measures that states are required to report back to SAMHSA are known as national outcome measures. We refer to them, you'll hear us talk sometimes about NOMs. That's what we're referring to. And these are measures or data that are tracked by all states that are tied to, again, that treatment prevention funding from SAMHSA. So the national outcome measures or NOMs are feature prevalence, treatment, funding in 10 domains. That really is important, but really what we're learning here is that we use data from prevention education pre-post surveys and community checkbox participant description to report these participant demographics for the strategies being implemented. So community checkbox, census estimates to report the number serves. So these NOMs, or national outcome measures, are accountability and performance measures that KDAS is required to report back up to SAMHSA. My cursor here. So, and just like you then, KDAS assesses and prioritizes areas of need and sets performance measures with targeted data objectives to achieve a 3-year span. So in fact, KDAS just submitted a new block grant application. So a request to receive money from SAMHSA based upon a set of performance measures. It's important for you to know what these performance measures are, because these are the areas based on your local data that you will be able to address with KPCCI funds. So here's what they are. So reducing underage drinking in Kansas. And that's measured by KCTC. And here, one thing that's interesting is it's not just our youth data. Underage actually goes up to age 20. You have to be 21 to purchase alcohol. So we're extending that underage drinking to include 18 to 20-year-olds. So it's youth and young adults age 18 to 20 is considered now underage drinking for being able to fund. The second is youth and young adults marijuana use. So that would be young adults, and this would be defined as age 18 to 25. And then youth and young adult vaping. And then you'll see that there's a new one. The last one is something new for our state. It's increased the fentanyl awareness in youth and young adults. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that, because that's an exciting new opportunity for communities to really make an impact. I will mention for those current implementation grantees, kind of just a note, risk factors are not prioritized per se for the new application as they've been in the past. While they are important, and there's some that are more relevant to these priority areas, you don't have to target them or prioritize them. So for example, perceived risk of harm, which has been mandated or required in the past, that's no longer the case, but it still may be something that you want to consider tracking. So with these new state level priority areas, KDAS wants you to understand why these 4 areas, this underage drinking, marijuana use, vaping, and fentanyl awareness, are the priorities for prevention focus. So we're going to look at some of the data related to each one of these and why they were selected or chosen. So this is a figure that shows the rank order from high to low for each year of the percentage of youth that reported use of substances in the past 30 days and over these past 3 years. And you can see consistently over time that alcohol, which is reported in that blue column, vaping in the orange column, and marijuana in the gray column are the 3 substances most often reported as being used. So these substances impact the largest number of Kansas youth. And so it makes sense why these are priority areas chosen by the state for ongoing prevention efforts. Okay, so this is for our young adults age 18 to 20. And similarly for what we saw with youth, we see with young adults, the top 3 substances reported are alcohol. And in this case, marijuana is second, but it is followed by vaping. So the same top 3, a little bit different order, but the same top 3. And as I mentioned, this is kind of the first time the state has really intentionally expanded and elevated that young adult population. And by making it a green block grant priority, it's allowing you to use funds to work on substance use prevention efforts for young adults, both in college and not in college. So that's kind of an exciting expansion and turn for our efforts as a state and as our efforts as prevention. Any questions so far on that before we talk a little bit about our final priority area? Okay. So in the 2023 Midwest high intensity drug trafficking area, it's known as HIDTA, law enforcement and public health surveys, they ranked fentanyl as the greatest drug threat to the region and as a major contributor to drug poisoning, deaths, and violent crime. So, so they have replaced fentanyl has replaced methamphetamine, which is now the secondary threat in the state. So we see overdose deaths for all drugs increased. We see synthetic opioids, that yellow bar, mainly as fentanyl is responsible for 347 overdose deaths in 2021, which is a 984% increase from 2017 over a 5-year span. So with this ongoing cause and concern and the overdose deaths that we're seeing and the crisis that we're seeing, the KPC, KDADS wanted to know how much Kansas youth and young adults even know about what fentanyl is and its risks. So prior to this last year, we didn't have any data to answer this question. So kudos to Stephanie Reinhardt, our state prevention program manager. She took quick action and said, hey, we need to gather some data. So one quick way to do that was to add questions to our statewide surveys and collect some baseline data. Yeah, that slide. We asked the question, you can see it on the figure here, how much have you heard about fentanyl? And we asked this for our student survey, our Kansas Community Care Student Survey for students in 6th, 8th, 10th, and 12th grade. And we also asked it this last year on our young adult survey, which is at age 18 to 25. So we have a baseline year of data for both of those populations. We also asked, you can see the 3 responses here. I've not heard about fentanyl, or I've heard about fentanyl, but I don't know what it is, or I have heard about fentanyl and I know what it is. Those were the 3 response options. We also asked about perceived risk of harm from accidental or intentional use. But what we found is that there was a fairly close split, you can see here, between the youth that had not heard about fentanyl and the percentage that have heard about fentanyl and know what it is. So about 39% for those youth who said they had not, and 40% for those who said that they have heard of it and know what it is. Not surprisingly, this pattern looks different for our young adults, which is what we see in the orange bar, where 3/4 had heard about fentanyl and know what it is. But this still means that 25% either hadn't heard of fentanyl or had heard about it and really don't know what that is. So we have a large percentage of that haven't heard or just aren't sure in both populations. So we wanted to take a little bit closer look too and see what kind of differences there were when you look at this data by grade, and that's what we're seeing here. And as expected, there's a much larger percentage of younger students that reported they'd not heard about fentanyl. And while you would expect that, we were still surprised that this percentage was so large. So for 6th graders, 67%, almost 70% had not heard about fentanyl. And just over a third of 8th graders hadn't heard, and just under a fourth of our 10th graders hadn't heard. So these data point to areas of need among Kansas youth, particularly those younger students. And that's why, increasing awareness of fentanyl is a new KDAD's block grant focus, a block grant priority, a new priority area. So what this means is that KPCCI grantees can use funds, block grant funds, to increase awareness of fentanyl in your communities. So let's talk about where the data is going to come from and what that might actually look like. So I mentioned we put these questions on the KCTC student survey last year to get some baseline data. So I know with some of the legislation and additional requirements around consent, it's been difficult for some schools to make the shift. We're still working on doing that. Just so you know, one thing we have done is to make it open up the survey a month earlier to help schools, instead of waiting till November, be able to start collecting that data in October. For some, that shortens a window they need to get those consents, and is being helpful for collecting data. But for those that do have KCTC data for their county, on the you can follow the arrow there. if you select your county, you follow the arrow there, there's some reports. And you'll notice that there's, if you click on reports, there's a number of different reports. And there's one that has the community report for the county. The last pages of that community report, you'll find data on fentanyl. So you'll see a comparison like you see on the right here on the top of your county or your community percentage saying those response options. And then the orange line is the state comparison. So you can see whether you're higher or lower than the state average. So on the right here, if we look at this community, the sample community, 53% of their students say they had not heard about fentanyl. That's much higher than this state average. That would indicate that this community would really be justified and really has a need to increase awareness within youth of fentanyl risks. So that data is available there. But as we said, we know that not everyone has data from KCTC, particularly this year. And so what you can do, because we know everybody has sixth graders, and we saw what sixth grade looks like across the state, and 8th and 10th. We know this is a current concern across our state for all communities. So if you don't have local level data, you can use the state goals and develop an action plan, like sample here for your KPCCI action plan. You can develop a fentanyl awareness action plan and use these goals of the state. These are the actual, like I said, the state has to set performance measures and targets too. So their goal is that they will report that those that have heard about fentanyl instead of the not, those who have heard about fentanyl from a baseline of 40 to 60 in 2 years. Also for young adults, increasing that from 75 to 85 in 2 years. So if your community wants to be part of that effort, you can use these as goals and we can help track it that way. And then you would develop an action plan like you do with any other strategies. And we'll be talking more about this with you because we said this is brand new. There are resources available. Where's my resources available that can help you as you're exploring this. DECA has a great resource. They created a fentanyl toolkit, which is also, I think, offered in Spanish. And the toolkit provides an overview of fentanyl, how to respond to an overdose, access to naloxone, access to treatment resources. And there are a number of fentanyl strategies that are out there. We'll talk more about these and options at that next training that we're all going to be at on October 11th. And you can talk to your community support specialist and your KPCCI support team. But there's some resources to start thinking about. So DECA has a Prevention Connection newsletter. There is, you may have heard, the One Pill Can Kill campaign. It features content that you can download to use on social media or produce print materials or place in your community. Song for Charlie is the site that contains a lot of resources, including 2 toolkits for youth, current data, social media resources. Stop Overdose has a lot of fact sheets and information on the site about fentanyl, polysubstance use, naloxone, stigma reduction. The Real Deal on Fentanyl has great information for youth and includes social media images. The Drop the F-Bomb, it's an ad council. The site provides resources to help parents talk to youth about fentanyl. And so just knowing that there are strategies available and can be developed and things can be used for that is important information for you to know. And like I said, we'll talk more about it, share it with your community support specialists. Your team will be speaking with you about it as well. And then also we mentioned that we're addressing young adults as well. Here is a guide and a website that you can go to, Campus Drug Prevention, where it gives you good ideas for working with young adults. So before we leave this topic, are there any questions? A lot of information, but it's important for you to understand where those priorities come from and why. And again, that the state is using data to back their priority decisions, and using the data that you're providing them to also look at our progress and outcomes.
I guess I have a quick question, ladies.
Sure.
And gentlemen, if there's gentlemen out there. I'm probably not in the greatest headspace right now about asking this, but I'm sitting here thinking about this data and how I'm trying to figure out, like, on the emotional side of these kids that we're trying to target. Like, I have a 7th grader right now, and I'm thinking about all the things that he's scared of right now. They've had shooter safety drills since he was, in kindergarten, kind of thing. And I understand that this is a thing that they're not aware of, and it's a huge risk. I get all that. But I'm sitting here trying to think, how many more things can we make our youth scared of? And how do we, are there tactics out there for us to approach this in a way that is not going to traumatize them even further than they already are with all the things that they need to be scared of in this world?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. That's it.
No, that's fine. That's a very, very good question, valid question. And I haven't looked at personally at quite all of these resources yet, but I would encourage to look at the one that talked about parents. Maybe I don't know parents of what age youth, that's the other question. But I would assume that this is something that, you're certainly not alone in. And so that's something in terms of resources that I think our community support specialists and your support teams can look specifically onto, is how to, particularly for those younger kids, how do we talk with way and that isn't so frightening, but still makes them aware, which they need to be aware, without frightening them. Any other thoughts we have a lot of people from DECA on the team as well. Any other thoughts or comments or discussion on that? It's a good point.
I missed the question, Lisa, so could you repeat it really quick?
I think we were talking about, our youth are exposed to a lot of scary things. And how do we approach something like risks of fentanyl? And maybe it's not so much the risk as being aware of that pill, it could be just simply campaigns that say, make sure you're not taking any pills that aren't prescribed for you or given to you by your parent or prescribed for you. That could be the message. It doesn't have to go into the whole one pill can kill type thing. But how do we work with youth, particularly younger kids, on creating awareness without creating the sense of fear and panic when they're already under a lot of stress, from a lot of other areas.
I'm gonna put in the chat a resource. The National Elks Lodge has some wonderful resources, and one of them is called Awkward Conversations. So I'm gonna put
Awesome.
a couple of things in the chat that people might want to look at. We work closely here in Pratt with our local Pratt Elks. They have a drug campaign, and they have a trailer that they go around to different events, and so they like to go to other towns too. So if you have a Elks Club in your vicinity, I'd hook up with them too. But I'll put these links into the chat for people to look at.
Yeah. And I would encourage your support team to follow up with you on additional resources too, specific to that, addressing that concern, because it's a very valid concern.
And this is Dina. Melissa, I'll follow up with you on some really great information from Montana's Institute for Social Norms, because we can present the data in a positive way, and that makes it less scary for them while raising awareness. And it's interesting that you mentioned active shooter, because that was one of the specific things at the Youth Leadership Conference in Pittsburgh last week that was mentioned, was the active shooter training. So I think we might need to look at ways to make that less scary because of the teachers receiving trainings.
I think. Thanks, Tina. Yeah. So and like I said, this is just kind of the intro. A kind of, hey, this is why we need to address this. Here's the data. There's plenty of time to talk about strategies and action plans. And these aren't required strategies by any means, but there's some suggestions of things that we know that are out there. So there will be more information to come on this topic, but it is new. So, anything else? All right. Thank you. Thank you for that. So shifting gears just a little bit, we're going to now talk about data sources. So think about the types of data that you use. We've talked about a couple sources already, and we'll talk more in depth about them here in a little bit. But think about kind of what level they're measuring. Are they measuring and reporting national data, or regional, like regional or state level data, or county data, or school building data? There's all different sources, all different levels of data that can be reported. So if we're looking at some of the common sources of data that we use for our prevention work, we have the Kansas Behavioral Health Indicators Dashboard, also known as the KBHID, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, just to let you know kind of what that is. That's data that gives you information on the county, at the state, and compares to national data. So you have 3 different levels of data for comparison there. Comparison in data is helpful. It kind of sees where you fit. You'll see it has this on the right there, a dashboard. You can see, am I in the, compared to the state, or compared to the nation, am I in the red, am I in the green, am I in the yellow, I'm in the middle, am I need to be worried, do I need to be, am I doing well? The Kansas Community Care Student Survey provides data for the state, for counties, and then for local level school districts and school buildings, although that data is password protected, but county level data. The Kansas Young Adult Survey data is state only, so it's important data, but it is not something that you're going to have local level data on from that source. The community checkbox, you provide local level data, but we can roll it up to county data or to the state as well, which is what we report aggregately with those national outcome measures. And then you have local sources. You can get data from focus groups, community surveys. If you want to talk more about how to collect data with community surveys or focus groups, contact your Greenbush evaluator, the evaluation team, or your community support specialist for help. We can help you find ways to find more local data sources for services. Some things that have been done in the past for local sources is doing community surveys at specific events. If you're at a particular event, you could offer like free coffee or other incentive for somebody who would complete a survey for you. Melissa recently talked about how sometimes if you work with your county community, you can get a link or information that goes out in a water bill or other material that goes out to all residents that's already going out, that you can say, hey, take a minute and take this survey, here's a link. So there's a lot of different creative ways that you can collect some additional local data if needed. Not always easy, but it's there are creative ways to do that can provide you with those sources. So one source of outcome data I just mentioned is the Kansas Behavioral Health Indicators Dashboard. It's also called the KBHID. I'd encourage you to go there. It's just kbhid.org. And you can select your county and you can go on and look at, it has a list of indicators and a gauge or dial that shows, as I mentioned, whether the community is high, moderate, or low risk compared to other counties in Kansas. I'm not going to necessarily take time today to go over the KBHID, but I encourage you to take some time to look at these measures. It helps provide a broader context for what's going on, and then maybe some insight into why things are the way they are. So there are things we know, like poverty, crime, adult substance use, those things you could find here related to your community that impact what's happening. with your schools and with youth and with young adults as well. So the source of data for you. You heard me talking about the Kansas Community Student Survey and the Kansas Young Adult Survey. I know you're well aware of the KCT survey, maybe less of the adult survey. I want you to be aware of that though, because we're now including that target population, that 18 to 25. So the youth survey we administer online every year. It's available to all public and private.
Lisa, are you back?
My
Yeah, you were frozen.
it's frozen. How long? Did you see
Just for a
that?
minute or so.
Yeah,
Did you see that?
just the last minute. You're not, the screen is not being shared anymore.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Well,
The information was getting so good.
yeah. So let me see if I can share. I don't know if I can share my screen. So apologize. I don't know about internet these days. So is this what we did?
Yeah,
Did I
it was the
did I-
last minute or so.
did I complete my conversation about the KB head?
I
I
don't think.
didn't know if you completed it, but you did say you encourage persons to look at it more.
So this just provides additional information for your community to, I guess, to go and get additional information to look at. You know, if we're going to be talking in October about health disparities, well, that's going to be related to data like poverty, crime, adult substance use. So this provides some kind of context for what you're seeing in your youth and your young adults within your community. It's a good source of data for you for behavioral health. Am I back?
You're fine, yes.
Okay. So I didn't know how it was like. So you've heard me talk a lot about KCTC, maybe less so about the Kansas Young Adult Survey. As you know, the KCTC is for students in 6th, 8th, 10th, and 12th grades. It's administered annually online for all public and private schools. The Young Adult Survey is for those 18 to 25. This will become more important, as I said, because we're now able to put funding towards this population. It's submitted online. There is a random sample process for this. But it is state level only. The other big difference between the convenient sample and the random sample is the youth survey requires parental consent. The young adult does not, because they're over 18. And the young adult, they do receive a gift card incentive for completing the survey. But it does only provide us with state level data at this time. But good ways to get information directly from our target audience. And then as far as looking at data sources, we know we report participant level outcomes in the community checkbox, but one area where you can collect that data is if you are implementing prevention education strategies, and we'll learn more about that. You know, there are pre and post survey evaluation surveys that you can have that will get you data to match what the individual knew before and what they have learned or what knowledge has been gained after implementation of a strategy. The one thing to keep in mind, we have a unique ID so that we can match the individual here to the individual here and see what gain they've made. Just remember, with prevention education programs, which Melissa will talk more about there in a little bit, parental consent is required if you're implementing in the schools. So that work has to be very well laid out in advance, so people know the school agrees and parents have signed the consent before that can be implemented. But that does provide some really valuable intermediate outcome level data for prevention. For those that do complete prevention education programs and do collect that data, Greenbush will prepare a survey I'm sorry, we'll prepare a survey link for you to use, but then also a report of the outcomes that will report, like I said, the matched pair knowledge gain, any findings that were statistically significant. So just know that that is also available for that prevention education, and we'll be happy to talk more with you about that. So talking about data sources and the outcome data, just remember we're tying this back to your work and your logic model to measure and answer those evaluation questions. You can see kind of in column 2 that risk factors, that why are those objectives, and then the last column, the goals and outcomes. That's where that outcome data that I've been sharing the data sources for come from. And I think then we're ready to have Dola talk about more of the process measures and where the data sources for that come from. So I will turn it back over to Dola.
Sure. So I'm wondering if we need a break. What are you thinking? It's about 9:55. We've been going pretty strong now for.
I think that's a good timing. Yes.
And
it's a
so
5-minute break.
I think so I don't know, Heather, if you can see that people have come back or not, or.
I can't really tell if they don't have their screens on.
We're all sleeping. We just left and aren't coming back.
Don't go to sleep. I've taken a nap before and overslept just for a nap.
You take a roll call.
If everyone would give me a like a thumbs up or a reaction, starting to see some, then I'll know that we're back.
Awesome. Thank you for that.
I think the majority of us are back.
I was going to say, since we're recording, we could go ahead and get started. So it's not afternoon, but I feel like I've been up for a minute. So good morning again. Now we are going to take a look into the community checkbox. I do want to let everyone know that this is a high level summary of technical assistance per se for the community checkbox. We will schedule an individual training or a group training in the future. What we did for today, though, is pull out things where we thought that we could strengthen our supports towards you. And so always, if you've been around anytime, you recognize that this is our accomplishment protocol for the community checkbox, along with some examples of what goes into the checkbox. So I'll just start. Everything supports the other. So in your SPIF phase, regardless to what SPIF phase it is that you're in, there should be some reporting of your accomplishments in that phase. And for every one of those phases, it requires the full accomplishment protocol. So when I'm talking about the protocol, your entry in the description should say who, what did you do, with whom you did it with, if that's applicable, why, and then when, and what was the result. So we've missed that. So the result is always important as well. What goes into the community checkbox as accomplishments are your coalition developments. So if you're right at the very beginning of organizing your coalition and you're creating your mission statement, your objectives, all of those things that are decisions that you make in order to develop your coalition are certainly an accomplishment, and that helps us evaluate the process of your coalition in your community. Any other decisions made, if you hired a new person, if you changed some sort of process as it relates to your KPCCI grant and addressing alcohol and marijuana in your community. So those would be your coalition developments, which overlap into your community development. So new relationships that you've built. if there's a new sector, so you have 12 sectors, right, that you're required or responsible to engage with in your community. So let's say you don't have anyone there yet from the school district, you have a new principal or a new teacher that's going to engage. That's a new relationship, of course. And then your support of risk and protective factors identified by your community data. So we just showed you where vaping and fentanyl, and then the inclusion of young adults. So anytime you make a decision to change based on your data, anything that you're going to do to address those issues in your community, those are community developments. And then, of course, everyone is pretty well aware of services provided, because that's what you're doing when you're implementing your strategies into your community. But you're also, if you are training a group, if you are informing parents, those are also things that are services provided. So think with an evaluation cap on when you are doing things in your community, and when in doubt, document. You can never over document. So if you're just not sure, just document the accomplishment, and we'll take care of that on our side. One thing I don't want to leave out is always going back to your action plan and your logic model. Use those as guides for what is or is not in the community checkbox. You're building those documents to help support the process that you engage in to address your risk and protective factors. Media efforts are another place. Media does not include announcements about a coalition meeting or, planning meetings. Media is when you are sharing information that would cause somebody to change their mind about how they're addressing a particular risk or protective factor. And so we'll talk a little bit about media in the coming slides, but the one thing I do want to emphasize, the description using the accomplishment protocol is really important to our evaluation process. There should not be any guesswork. If you go back to that slide 7, I think it's become my favorite slide. I saw it differently today, but the meaningful program evaluation, doing that with fidelity, it helps us hit all of those points. Yeah. And then it decreases, the feedback maybe that we would have to come back to you and ask you qualifying information to help us gather what it is you're actually doing. So using that accomplishment protocol is very important. We did leave off a bullet after when. It should be the result. And so who, which would be you if you are the documenter. If you did it with someone, adding that, what you did, why you did it, when, and the result. So just want to continue to drive that point. And if you would take me to the next slide, Lisa, it should be the logic model, which just ties back, like I said, to what your accomplishments are, to what some of your accomplishments should be taken from the strategy. So if your data supports that, and you have decided based on your data that you are going to implement, as this example shows, Too Good for Drugs, Talk They Hear You, and then if you go down to the bottom to your list of other strategies, Sticker Shock and Party Patrol, then you want to that should help guide you as to what accomplishments you are entering in the CCB. And so those accomplishments can be based on your assessment activities, your planning activities. So the whole of the SPIF phase as it relates to those accomplishments should be something that is indicated in your SPIF phase, in your accomplishments. So we should be able to go through the SPIF phase and compare your accomplishments. It's not always going to be a one-to-one match, let me say that. So don't do that, but I'm just helping you think about, when you're thinking about what should go into the community checkbox, you're going to be looking at the SPIF phase, looking at your logic model, your action plan, and then anything that you have accomplished within the realm of the KPCCI funding process, as you're addressing marijuana, alcohol, vaping, and fentanyl. So any questions about that? And so I know you've received a lot of information this morning, and we're going to keep providing this information to you. We are recording, and anytime you get into, where you have a question, please go ahead and complete the accomplishment form entry and just send Shelby or I a quick email. Hey, we've got a question about something we've entered into the CCB, and that'll allow us the opportunity to continue providing you the best support is at the time you're entering the data, versus, like Lisa said, when it's over and we're trying to go back and remember what we did. It's very hard to do. It's not kind of hard to do it. It's very hard to do. So if there are no questions, I'm going to pass this on. Lisa, I'm ready for the next slide. And Melissa's going to share with us about this slide. Thank you.
So we're going to talk a little bit about the SAMHSA's prevention core strategies. And you'll see some of this language when you start to enter into the CCB under the category of what does it do. Those are the same descriptions, just condensed a little bit, that you'll find on the checkbox. So don't worry if you don't remember all of these right off the bat. This is for reference, and also know that it's in there. So the first strategy we're going to talk about are community-based processes. And these are processes that are designed to help your community be more effective in how they offer services. These can include things like organizing or planning, enhancing efficiency, interagency collaboration, coalition building, and those other types of activities. More specifically, they can involve things like volunteer training, or systematic planning, or multi-agency coordination and collaboration, or accessing services and funding, and then again, community team building. And the primary way that you are going to evaluate these activities is going to be recording in this checkbox, the community checkbox. And just as Dola just shared, you're going to want to record the information about the meeting, any outcomes that came from the activity, who was present, what the purpose is, and so on. The second core prevention strategy that we're going to talk about today is drug-free alternatives. Now, these are activities that provide constructive and healthy activities that are designed to offset the attraction to fulfilling needs that youth often use substances to fill. Examples of this strategy may include drug-free dances or parties, youth adult leadership activities, community drop-in centers, or community service activities. And these can sometimes be a little more difficult to evaluate, because if you have an activity with a lot of students coming, you may not be able to gather demographic information. It may be all you can do just to get the numbers that have attended. So some other ways that you could gather data potentially are to provide event feedback surveys or questionnaires. You're always going to want to do your best to record numbers that you serve. You can have focus groups or town hall type follow-ups where you actually get some qualitative data from the people that attended your event. And as I said before, whenever possible, try and gather demographic information. Excuse me. The third strategy is environmental changes, and these fall into two categories: policy and enforcement. And these strategies aim to change community standards. And it doesn't matter if these are written standards such as codes or public policy, or unwritten community standards such as the willingness for, maybe you live in a community where adults are known for social hosting, and that seems to be okay. But you want to change that unwritten community standard to realize that people realize that it's not okay to host youth in engagement in alcohol. And these are strategies that when you go to evaluate, they're going to look slightly different depending on what stage of development you're in. You're going to want to record what the policy or enforcement standard was, what standard was changed, and how it was changed. You're going to use local level data collection to gauge the level of reach and change. And then you're also going to want to record that in the CCB. You may say, well, Melissa, how do I know if we've help develop a policy change? How do I know what effect it has? You can look at whatever data it was that you used to find out that was a need, whether that is the number of suspensions for, say you were targeting alcohol use or substance use during school. You can look and you get a policy change for that. You would look at how many students are now being suspended for that, or how many are engaged in alternative activity. So you can look at a reduction in the rate in the frequency of how often those suspensions are occurring. For example, if you are working with a school district, for an environmental change, say in your community, reported the police report there's been a decrease in social hosting. Or if you're doing enhanced enforcement, more activities where youth were using substances have been broken up by police based on whatever your policy change was, or your increase of enforcement that you were trying to have. The fourth core prevention strategy that you'll see, and these are in order of what you'll find them in the community checkbox, is information dissemination. And these are campaigns that seek to provide awareness and knowledge regarding alcohol and substance use, tobacco use, addiction, and how they can affect the families, how they affect your communities, how they're affecting youth in your community. And the key to remember when you're trying to decide if a specific strategy falls under information dissemination is that it's characterized by one-way communication. That means you are presenting someone to somebody else and you're not getting any feedback. There's no necessarily exchange of ideas, or if there are, it's minimal. And sometimes these can be things like doing presentations. But if it's a presentation where you're just providing information and not getting any feedback, or getting very little feedback, that is considered information dissemination. Some other examples might include resource directories, media campaigns, both in print or online, social media platforms, brochures, radio ads, TV PSAs, speaking engagements, and billboards. And while these, excuse me, I'm so sorry. And while these, you have a lot of different activities that can fall under information dissemination. So when you go to evaluate them, the method of evaluating may look, or it will look different depending on what strategy you're using. For print materials, You may track the number of materials that you have printed and how many get dispersed. For social media platforms or anything online, you may need to use your analytics that are associated with that platform. For billboards, maybe you have to use to figure out what your reach is. You're going to look at KDOT traffic data and how many people travel that road and go past that billboard every day, so that you can have an estimate of how many people you've reached. But again, you're going to record all of it in the CCB. The fifth core strategy is prevention education, and this is the one that I think people are most familiar with. These aim at teaching life skills and social skills, and include decision making and refusal skills and critical analysis and systemic judgments abilities. But when we talk about critical analysis, it can be anything from looking at an advertisement, looking at advertisements for, say, vaping products, and talking about that and becoming aware of helping students become aware of what are they trying to sell you? What's the messaging they're trying to give you, and why do you think that is? It really makes the students process things differently when they encounter them out in the public. Melissa Lunsford has a question. Go ahead, Melissa.
I'm sorry, bring you back to like the social media kind of thing. I guess I struggle with the timeline of needing to report it quickly, not forget it, all that good stuff. But for like Facebook analytics, you'd need to wait a while in order for you to know what your reach was, kind of thing. I mean, how do you guys want us to balance the very prompt reporting versus the accurate reach?
So you're typically, if you say you are changing your advertisement once a week, you may look at the analytics once a week to report on how many people you reached in that week. If you're only changing your media messaging once a month, once that month is concluded and you're on to a different one, you'll record the reach from that previous month and what you had put out there. So as long as something is still running, you're going to continue reach. And the thing about the CCB is, if you notice that something that you've previously posted that you've already reported on has gotten a lot more traction or has been shared a lot more, you can go back in your CCB entry and make the changes to update your reach. Dola, do you want to share anything about that?
Not at this time.
Okay. Does that make sense, Melissa?
Yes, that's perfect. Thank you.
Okay. So back to prevention education. These are typically what we think of as evidence-based programs educational programs with curriculum that we do with youth. That's not always 100% the case. Not all prevention education programs are done in units or have a specific spelled out curriculum. Some have a little more flexibility than others. The key to remember, though, if you're going to implement a prevention education program with youth, is one, think about fidelity, because especially if you're using an evidence-based program, because part of the reason they're evidence-based is because they were implemented in the same way over and over again, and the results were proven to make a difference. So when you make changes to prevention education programs, which you may need to do on occasion, depending on the population you're serving, be very careful, and hopefully you'll reach out to the evaluation team before you decide what changes to make, to try and ensure fidelity to the program, because you don't want to skew your outcomes. These prevention education programs are typically measured and evaluated using pre-post surveys, using our unique ID system that Lisa described to you earlier. With the new legislation that we have in place, working in school districts, it's made it very difficult to implement some education programs within the school school district, because they have to have parental consent for them to complete the pre and post surveys. And a lot of schools are just like, that's too much work. So at the very least, you need to have the person that's teaching the program complete a fidelity survey, and you need to be recording numbers served by the program, numbers in attendance, and if you can gather any type of data regarding demographics, record that information as well. And that will all go into the CCB. Pre-post surveys come directly to Greenbush. They don't go directly to the CCB or where you'll enter them in the CCB. That the CCB is where you'll enter information about this session was held at this time with this many attendees. The actual outcomes will come to you in a report of any surveys that you were able to collect. You can also ask reflection questions. Again, if you're working in a school district, you need to make sure you have permission, and parents will need to see the questions that you're planning on asking ahead of time, typically. You can also record behaviors and attitude changes that you observe during these sessions where you're providing the prevention education. The key to remembering how to distinguish prevention education from, say, information dissemination is that prevention education engages in two-way communication. So between the educator or facilitator and the participants. Activities and methods include in the classroom or small group sessions. These can include parenting classes or family management classes, peer-to-peer programs, education programs, prevention education programs that you're doing with youth groups or with children of substance abusers groups. The final core strategy that we taught, that SAMHSA provides us information on, is problem identification and referral. This one you might think of kind of intersecting with prevention and harm reduction, because oftentimes these are people or students that have either engaged in illegal or inappropriate substance use, or who have had an early onset of use, that it is believed their behavior may be reversed through education. These are not treatment strategies. These are identifying at-risk populations, and then referring them to a specific program or to the health department or to wherever other connection you're making. It's that referral process. And you can evaluate this through by recording the number of referrals that you make or that are made, and sharing how the determination for referral was made. We'll get into, in just a minute, we're going to talk about some specific examples of each of these strategies. So before we move on to talking about some specific examples of strategies, does anybody have any questions? Going once, going twice. All right. So when looking at strategies, some of these strategies you may think, well, these fit into more than one category, which can make it sometimes difficult when you're trying to record and track the activities that you're doing. So when making those determinations, you have to stop and think about the action that's being taken and where in the process of planning or implementation the activity actually falls. For example, you may want to work with your local city council and health department to establish stricter policy for alcohol consumption on city properties. Meetings with that agency to collaborate would be a community, fall under core community of the, I'm sorry, tongue-tied for a second, would fall under the core strategy of community-based processes. To increase the awareness and generate community support, let's say you create a media campaign using your local level data to inform your community of what youth are saying about alcohol use. So distributing that campaign would fall under information dissemination. Then you're finally ready. You feel like you have the support needed to get your policy, your new policy passed by your commission. So you bring your policy to the commission to vote on. The policy gets approved, and then enforcement starts going forward with that new policy. That would be fall under environmental change because you are changing a policy within your city. So I know the thought of evaluation can sometimes scare people, but it's important to remember that evaluation helps us to measure our successes. It helps us to know when we need to pivot if we aren't seeing the outcomes we're trying to achieve. Evaluating strategies needs to have a consistent and reproducible way of collecting data and measuring outcomes, but the method of evaluation and the tools that you use will be different and look different based on the strategy that you're using and the population that you're working with. So we're going to discuss more about evaluation coming up, but right now we're going to do a little activity. So I would like everyone to open up their chat, and we're going to play a little game. I'm going to describe an activity or a strategy to you, and you're going to decide which one of these categories, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, so community-based, drug alternatives, environmental changes, and so on. You're going to put the number associated with that strategy in the chat box for what you think it is I'm describing. So where it falls. Did I talk in circles? Is this like clear as mud? Thumbs up if you understand what we're doing. Okay. So, and whoever wins gets epic bragging rights. So, all right, are you ready for a little bit of a challenge? Well, for some of you, they may not be very challenging, but it's always good to practice what we've learned to try and reinforce it and get it into our long-term memories. So in this first example, yes, epic bragging rights. DOLA. So in this first example, you are working with your local school district which has signed an MOU agreeing to implement a prevention education program in their middle school health class. Which strategy would this fall under? So I'm going to reread this one more time. You are working with your local school district who has signed an MOU to agree to implement a prevention education program. So you would be correct in that the prevention education program falls under 5, prevention education. However, the meeting with the school district and the planning and the preparation falls under a community-based process. So you have to stop and think about the activity that's being described, not just the program that you want to be implemented. So a couple of people said 1. So 1 point for Stacy, 1 point for Jennifer. Yes, the process it takes to get to the implementation. Correct, Stacy. Next example. Now that you have the agreement signed, the health teacher has begun teaching Too Good for Drugs to their students. Too Good for Drugs is a universal curriculum designed to mitigate the risk factors and enhance protective factors related to alcohol, tobacco, and other drug use. What would that fall under? And if you need me to reread it one more time or reiterate it one more time, let me know. All right, I'm only seeing 2 responses. I know there's more of you on here than that. All right, this would fall under prevention education because we are talking about the implementation of the Too Good for Drugs program, which is a prevention education strategy. The next one, so in an effort to have as much influence on reducing substance use among youth, you join with local alcohol retailers and law enforcement, youth and community members to do a sticker shock campaign. Sticker shock is an activity that raises public awareness about underage drinking and strengthens the deterrent effect of law against providing alcohol to minors. This one is tricky. Okay, so depending on what part of that you were focusing on, if you were focusing on the collaboration and joining with local alcohol retailers and law enforcement and community, you would be correct in saying that that is a community-based process. If you are referring to the sticker shock activity, that actually is an environmental change, which totally throws people for a loop because it focuses on changing the written and unwritten community standards with regards to alcohol. So don't worry, you'll have lots of practice and support as you learn to go through and really evaluate different strategies and what it should fall under. So if you said 3, add a point to your box or to your score sheet. And we'll go ahead and give some points if you said community-based processes when we're focusing on the first part of that program. All right, next one. In order to, yes.
So could you separate that into 2 different like entries to have community-based process and?
Absolutely, because one would be your planning portion where you're working to collaborate with these agencies, which is one entry. And then the actual implementation of doing sticker shock is a second entry.
Okay, that's what I was thinking. Thank you.
I want to emphasize the way, Melissa, thank you. Those are 2 separate entries. It's not one entry and you select multiple options. It's 2 separate entries. So thank you for that. In the 2 separate entries in the CCB. Thank you.
Okay, next one. In order to reach parents, you decide to use Talk They Hear You to create weekly social media messaging. The middle school principal also includes the campaign in their weekly parent emails. All right, anybody else want to get it in there to get a point for epic bragging rights? All right, this would be information dissemination because we're talking about the distribution of the material. All right, we have 2 more of these left. So you still have a chance to pull ahead. And then this next one, students have reported that there isn't much to do in their free time outside of school and sports. Your coalition has decided to host monthly events to support healthy behaviors in youth. Your first event is hosting an after prom event complete with bouncy houses and carnival games. Yeah, I think that one was an easy one. Drug-free alternatives. All right. This last one is a doozy, and I'm going to challenge you because there are 4 different strategies that you would record if you were doing this last thing. I'll kind of break it down into pieces for you, but I'm going to read the whole thing from start to finish first. You work with your local school district to connect students who have gotten into trouble for drug possession and their families. I'm sorry. You work with your local school district to connect students and their families who have gotten in trouble for drug possession, to connect to your local health department to complete the Strengthening Families program, an evidence-based family skills training program for high-risk and general population families in lieu of suspension. So the first piece of that is you're working with your local school district to connect students and families who have gotten in trouble with someone else. The second part is you've worked with your school district because this is in lieu of suspension. So you're working on them changing their policy. And then once they are connected with the health department and they're completing that, they're actually implementing and completing that Strengthening Families program. All right, 16135 136 6153. Okay. All right. 1 point for each one that you get correct. So you can really pull ahead for those epic bragging rights on this one. So working with the school district is a community-based process, those meetings with the school district. The school agreeing to a new policy in lieu of suspension is an environmental change that falls under the policy category. Connecting students and families to the health department falls under problem identification and referral. And then completing the Strengthening Families falls into prevention education. So, who got the epic bragging rights? I didn't keep track of everybody's scores. So you tally your own up and let me know how many points you think you got, or how many points you got. All right, if nobody else claims it, Jennifer is claiming the bragging rights. So everybody give Jennifer and give yourselves a round of applause, because it's not easy to be able to identify things and to learn them, but you'll get there and you have lots of support as you're going through it. So now I am going to turn it back over, I believe, to
Me.
Dola.
Yeah. So that was great. Thank you so much, Melissa. I really appreciate it. I think is there another slide before that? No. Okay. So it's not me, but that's okay. I'll take this opportunity to once again thank Melissa, and then to reiterate that you will have lots of help and lots of practice. Shelby and I will be attending the Spiff Face training, where we'll be there to reiterate how to take what it is you're doing in your communities, just like the example, the great example that Melissa just shared, and how to take that and then say what you did, right, in the community checkbox. One of the things that we used to always say, if it's not in the checkbox, it didn't happen. And from that last example, I would hate for all that work to be viewed as not happening, because takes process and it's overtime. So to the point where someone was saying, how are we looking at how things are happening and your requirement to enter things in the CCB? Of course, if it didn't happen, you really can't put it in there. But following the process, and sometimes that's hard. If you think you've been talking about sticker shock or something for a long time, and so you think, oh, I already posted about it because we talked about it in our meeting. But then you go through that whole process of the CSAP strategy. So just thinking about, we had a talk about what we were going to do. We identified, how it's going to affect the processes in the schools, and now we're going to implement it. So we'll be there throughout those phases to help you parse that information out and into the CCB. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Shelby, and I'll be popping in here and there as we review the actual accomplishment form. I know we just took a break.
I was wondering that too, if it would
Another
be,
section.
so we don't have to break up that time, if it might be a good
Absolutely.
time for another quick break.
I think so too.
So let's take another 5-minute break, just because we're going to be starting a new block talking about accomplishments. We want to make sure you get your get some time in to stretch your legs. So let's come back in about 5 minutes. Would be 10 what?
10:51.
10:50. Yeah, 10:51. Take a couple 5 minutes. Take 4 or 5 minutes, and then we'll stretch a little bit, get some more water, and then we'll come back and we'll.
Dola, can you pause the recording?
I think so. Yes, I can.
Thank you.
All right. Hey everyone, I'm Shelby. Just a quick little introduction. And I will be going over the CCB and adding accomplishments into the CCB. I've broken it down into the different section headers just to kind of like talk about, as Dola mentioned, like a high level summary of a quick run through of it. And then I'll be like running through the monthly reports and just any quick little refreshers of anything we've talked about before. So if anybody has any questions on anything, just stick your hand up or put it in the chat. So the first section consists of the grantee information. So your guys' information is just the date, your name, the initiative, and the initiative is already pre-populated. So as long as it's under the KPC initiative, you don't have to do anything with that one. The next one is the KPC project. So I've noticed a couple people, if the accomplishment that you're adding is like a planning activity or like implementation accomplishment, you'll select either planning or implementation. That's not pertaining to the accomplishment. It is your project. So if you are an implementation grantee, select implementation, and if you're a planning grantee, select planning. Is the accomplishment supported by ARPA funding? Yes or no? Your organization, and then just selecting whatever cohort you're in. I do want to highlight, can we go over to the next slide, please? There's all the sections. So I do want to highlight the, is this accomplishment supported by ARPA funding? Just make sure that you guys are answering that question. And if you guys are, if your accomplishment is supported by ARPA funding, make sure you select yes. So just wanted to point that one out to the next slide.
Sorry,
so
Shelby.
Oh, yes.
I thought Dola had told us last time that that was no for everybody. Is that not accurate?
Joel, do you want to take?
If I said that, it is not accurate, and I apologize. I don't know what would make me say that, but that's not right. And so, yes,
For
if
the
you,
KPCCI, would that not be correct for KPCCI?
no, that's not right. There are KPCCI grantees who received, I think it's the first round was $7,000. I'm not sure what the other amount was. But if you are a KPCCI grantee, and all of you are, and you received ARPA funding, we do want to track how the ARPA funding is supporting your implementation efforts in the community. So I apologize if I said that. I'm
So
not sure.
Lisa, how do we know if we got any of that funding? Because I have no clue. I've been marking no on all those because of that training back in July.
I would think if you had funding for it, you would know.
Okay.
Right. And maybe that was the context that I said no, and I apologize. The other way you could check though is through DECA, but I would think that if you had received additional funding, you would know that. So
Well, the only thing that makes me a little bit speculative based on this conversation alone is that originally they told the grantees that we would be getting like 30,000 a year or something like that, and then all of a sudden it bumped up to a higher amount when we actually got our contracts. So there may be some of that funding in there. I don't know. So we probably ought to dig a little deeper with KDADS just to know for sure.
yes.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Review the contracts, see if you have any ARPA funding, and then you go from there. So the next section, the second section, is under accomplishments. This is just like the basic information pertaining to the accomplishment. And there is some animation on this one, so just kind of by the section. So did you work with another organization coalition? That's just a yes or no select. Which counties were involved in the accomplishment, which zip code was involved in the accomplishment, kind of falls into the county. And then description. I want to point out description real quick. Just making sure that you're recording who did what, with whom, for what reason. You guys are doing a great job of recording the accomplishments in the CCB, and that's awesome. I just noticed a couple little things. There are some people that will record an accomplishment, and I don't think there's any this short, but for example, somebody might say, we had a meeting. Cool. What about? What? Why? Because if I'm looking at that description and I'm like double checking the data to make sure that it is as accurate as possible, so you guys have the best data possible, I'm going to look at that and I'm going to have no clue what happened. If you guys talked about an evidence-based strategy, I don't know, so I'll change that to like, you didn't talk about an evidence-based strategy. It looks like a development activity, which meetings usually are. But there needs to be a little bit more context with the description also. I love the detail you guys put in the descriptions, but if it's like a half a page, it does not need to be half a page. Just a couple sentences explaining what happened is perfect. And then moving on to coding, and we'll go a little bit more into this in just a second. But just making sure that you guys are hitting all the codes. And then we can go to the next slide. And speaking of the codes, I have noticed there's been multiple selection of the codes. The only time that we ever dual code is for community change and services provided. So for an example, the first time you put on a workshop, that would be a change in the community, and a services provided. And then the next time you would have that community workshop or service, then that would just be a services provided. So just making sure that you guys are only selecting one code. And then to the next slide. And then just running through them. implementation grantees, you've been coding, planning grantees, I'm sure this is a little new, so just a little quick run through. Community change is anything in the community that is new or modified, any new practice, policy, any type of change. So if a new policy in the school system goes through that you guys advocated for, that would be a change. And then speaking of advocacy, that brings me to the community action. The best way to think about community action is advocacy. So if you're meeting with the superintendent, principal, representative, and Congress, those are community actions. Developmental actions are any meeting. So developing an assessment, strategic plan, evaluation, anything with sustainability. That would be a developmental activity. Services provided is any class, workshop, any service you are providing to the community. And media coverage is anytime that your organization or coalition is being promoted through radio, TV, brochures, social media. So if it involves media, it's usually media coverage. Oh yeah, absolutely. To answer Janae's question, you can absolutely print these off. But moving on to the next slide.
Can I think somewhere in one of our slides, there is a link and it'll take you to the workstation. And there you'll see all of those resources there, but we'll also provide the slide deck as well. Thanks.
And there is some animation on this slide too. So just kind of going through real quick. This is a little bit more in depth into the into the description for the accomplishment. This is a section that is very important to us evaluators, and to any future like presentation you have to show what you accomplished in under this grant. This is basically the meat of like why you did what you did. So making sure to mark this as like, is this the first time this activity has occurred? Specific outcomes, and I will highlight that section in a little bit actually, but just going over the questions. Is this accomplishment related to an evidence-based strategy? Yes or no? As an example, I selected yes, there was a prevention education activity involved and it was Botiffin's life skills. Making sure you're selecting the SPIF phase. Is this activity related to a behavioral health disparity? CSAP, and then please select from the following for prevention education. So that follows CSAP. So if you select prevention education, you'll select one of the following down below. Which sectors were engaged. So if you did something with youth or youth in law enforcement or youth in schools, those are the sectors. And then length, and if you'll go to the next animation pertaining to length, on frequency, but you'll notice the red boxes around the help button. Those are the, if you click on those help buttons beside the question, if you have any questions over that certain question, then a help box will, oh, I'm not done with that slide yet. The next, or if you click on the help button, then a little box will show up, such as the one on the last slide that says length. Lacey, could you, thank you. And I did want to point out length, just as an example, also with the help box. So that's what the length box will look like. And I just wanted to review length because sometimes people get a little confused over how length is presented and how you enter that one. So 1 minute equals 1. So if you had a 5-hour training or a 5-hour workshop, mental math, 60 minutes in an, or 60 minutes in an hour. So that'd be 60 times 5. 6 times 5 is 300. So you put 300 in there. And then we go to the next slide. And And I did want to say, going over these specific outcomes, just wanted to emphasize that I noticed people selecting all when you're going under these specific outcomes. I just wanted to clarify that unless the strategy is in, just 1 second, Dana. Unless the strategy is in your logic model, you don't need to select that strategy or that outcome. So if you're talking about, if you select alcohol and fentanyl, but fentanyl is not part of your logic model, you don't need to select fentanyl, just alcohol. Dana, you have a quick question.
Dina, do you have a question? She may have inadvertently hit it.
That's fair. Okay. I think that's all that I had on that, highlighting that specific question. So we can head over to the
I do not
next
have a
slide.
question. I think my cat must have hit it.
Oh. And then also, yes, going over the type of evidence-based strategy. So, under prevention education, the evidence-based strategies that are listed in the section are strategies. Yes, sorry. For example, strategies like Red Ribbon Week, fourth down, or I think, yeah, fourth down after prom, alternatives like that, because they are, yeah, so that they won't include under prevention education because they can be implemented based on the needs of the community.
I just want to make sure that we're clear on that, because I think knowing the type of strategy is important. It's going to be important that you understand that the strategy you're implementing and what type it is, because there is a list. So if you go under media awareness and you're actually implementing a prevention education strategy, of course you won't find it under media awareness. And sometimes, after all the questions and all the things you've done, we're tired and frustrated. And so we don't answer the question or we don't enter the accomplishments. So I just want to, the more you know about your strategy, and I think the logic model, if you go back to your logic model, it will tell you what, or your DECA specialists will talk you through what type of strategy it is, and to help you identify what type of approved evidence-based strategy you're implementing. Just want to make that clear.
Does anybody have any questions on evidence-based strategies or anything I've discussed up to this point? Cool. All right, we can head over to the next slide. And then SPIF phase. Wanted to just go over SPIF phase real quick. And Dole and I actually added yesterday it pulls up when you press the drop down, and basically it just mentions this. That way it's just like a little reminder when you're inputting or adding the accomplishments. Basically, implementation should not be selected if unless you're actually implementing a strategy. So if you're having a discussion or a meeting or setting something up for an evidence-based strategy, then you could definitely mark that evidence-based strategy was being used, but you were not implementing that evidence-based strategy, if that makes any sense. So just for example, do not select implementation if your accomplishment is related to discussing or planning. However, if you did a workshop over Bottom's life skills, then that would be an implementation. We can head over to the next slide. All right, and we're just heading into the fourth section. This one's a little bit smaller than the other sections. This one just addresses media. There's only 2 questions. What type of media did you use, and how, or the amount of media you used. So for this example, I used Facebook, and there was 2 posts on Facebook to promote the event. So say you were having a fair, community fair, or booth at the community fair, and you're putting that accomplishment into the CCB, and you made 2 posts about it on Facebook or another social media platform, or you put an ad in the newspaper. That's where you would go into type of media and then select how many times that media appeared. And then just doing another little, or pointing out another help text button under amount of media. There is 2 links to the workstation, and they list out the daily and weekly newspaper circulation. So if you can't remember what newspaper that an ad possibly, or you placed an ad in, or if a media was pertaining to newspaper, you can click on that link and you can review that.
Shelby, do you want me to click on that?
Dola, do you want to take that? Oh, you're muted.
Yes, Lisa, that would be great to
This
provide.
one on the left, or this one? I don't know.
So I think the one that Shelby just mentioned was the one in the help text. Is that correct, Shelby?
Yes.
Okay, so
I don't think I can
Yeah, that's
click
part
on
of
that.
the
Oh.
picture.
So I'm sorry, I don't think I can actually click on
it's
that.
okay. It's okay. We'll have our specific training. So in that link, what it will do if you use, we don't have papers here in Wyandotte anymore, but the Lawrence World Journal, and you didn't know how many, what the number of population it was that was going to be reached. That list gives you a list of newspapers across the state of Kansas, and it gives you the number that you would use for that particular, for your entry, if it was related to a newspaper article. I think it's newspaper and radio, if I'm not mistaken, that's over there. If not, that's what those links are. It just gives you the population. The other link is where I was mentioning earlier that there are supports related to the CCB that we've just talked about, supports to help you answer the questions. So to help you answer the question about media, the CSAP questions, the SPIF phase, the codes. So all of those resources are over there for you. One other thing, you saw the red boxes. If you would just go back 1 slide, Lisa, I think Shelby may have forgotten to mention the red boxes. Now, on most of the questions, we have help text. Everything makes sense because when you're doing it, but if you read the help text and it does not help you, please let us know so that we can further break it down or change our language, because we want you to have support right throughout the process. So I just wanted to point that out. I know that was one of the things Shelby wanted to mention. So thank you for that.
I think that leads into the last slide for entering or adding accomplishments. And this is the final section. And yay, you finally get to the final section. You have entered your accomplishment. It just talks about participant description. It is a little smaller, like the media section, and there's only 2 questions. So it addresses target participants. So this is where you click youth 12 to 17, young adults 18 to 20, and then number of individuals served. So that's where you have recorded how many individuals have either interacted with your post or attending your workshop, and you'll enter that, and then taking it a little farther than just entering these 2 questions into the about the participants. In the next animation, you'll see at the bottom it says save and close, save and add another, and just cancel. Cancel just cancels out that entire accomplishment that you just entered, so I wouldn't advise clicking that. Save just saves it. Save and close saves the accomplishment and brings you back to the main page where you see everyone's accomplishments. And then save and add another. If you press that, save the accomplishment, and the page will repopulate and you can enter another accomplishment. But I did want to highlight just pressing save, because when you press save, it also, going to the next animation, brings or lets you enter information into the participant's description box at the top. You scroll back up, it'll look like that, and you'll want to click on a participant description, and it'll bring down this drop down list. And on the next slide, I'll show you what it looks like. And this is what the drop down participant description looks like. This is where you enter total number served, total new participants, and then the demographics. So this will help you be able to keep track of what populations are attending your events. If there's a missing piece of, if you're missing a certain part of the population, you'll be able to identify what part of the population you're missing if you're entering the demographics. And also at the end of the grant period, you'll be able to see how many people you were able to help, and then also what populations you were able to help. So that would be really cool to have. So if you can get this demographic data, that would be awesome. And then heading over to the next slide, which talks about participant description, and I will give this over to Dolan.
I'm laughing. I'm sorry. I'm not laughing at you, Shelby. I'm laughing because if people have been around for a while, when you said, if you can get this information, that would be awesome. I'm like, look, here's how we're going to get this information. So sorry. This document it just kind of highlights all of the ways that you can get the information. So of course, if you have a coalition meeting, you're going to use your sign-in sheets. We've modeled that very well. Chad and WSU have done an awesome job. And every time we have a meeting, you usually have a link where you're putting in your information and your own information related to your description of yourself. So that's coalition meetings, community events. The larger they are, the more challenging it is. So if it's a community event, it's small and it's small enough for you to offer the geographic information, the sign-in sheet. Do that. I kind of use like 50. If you're hosting the community event yourself, it's easier to do. You can do it as people are going in, when they're sitting down for particular presentations. You kind of have to gauge how to manage that, but being very intentional about getting the information. If it's a fall festival, then you're going to collect the information at your booth or at your table. You can do that by the number of brochures. So that means if I'm just handing out brochures, you're probably not going to get specific participant description. But if you're enrolling students in something and you're passing out information to the families, you can take the opportunity to ask them to fill out that participant description form for you. You kind of have to gauge what your fair or what your larger meeting looks like. Basically, I'm not going to go through each area of the form that of the slide, but it's just being intentional. I know that I'm having this kind of meeting and then thinking about how can I gather the participant description information. It's really important information. We talked about funding. A lot of our funding is based on making sure that we're serving, the diverse population of, across the state of Kansas. And so it's very important. It determines, I think, the amount of money and what monies are going to particular communities. So absolutely very important. When in doubt, document. And if you have questions about, I'm having this type of event, or we are attending this type of event, using your DECA support specialists, Shelby or I, or even the Greenbush team, if you put us all in one email, we can all chime in and help support you. But that information is very important. The only time that I would say you just wouldn't have the opportunity, I just think the larger the crowd is, the harder it is to say who you served. And that's where, that's where we become more lenient about getting the opportunity to get the information. It becomes easier. So the classrooms, if you all are doing, a lot of you all are in classrooms. Of course, you have the pre and post tests from surveys, rather, from Greenbush. And then classrooms can be, you invited a group of parents as well. So we know that providing that sign-in sheet with that information that's the highest opportunity towards gathering the participant description. Places where you don't need participant descriptions would be if you're having a work meeting. So, you've gathered another coworker to talk about, carrying out a plan. That's not the type of meeting. It would be your meetings that were outwards toward your community. I think I covered all of those points. Yes. Also on the workstation, you'll find a couple of templates where actually WSU created templates to help you gather that participant description information. So we all work together in making sure that you're able to respond accurately and with fidelity in the CCB. Thank you, Shelby.
All right. So we've covered over our entering an accomplishment. So at the end of the month, once you've entered all your accomplishments that happened at the end of the month, I'll go through. Also look at the accomplishments, make sure everything is coded correctly and everything is as accurate as possible. So I can put together these monthly progress reports that you guys have seen over the last couple months. And to review kind of what's in the reports, it's how many accomplishments happened that month, how many first-time accomplishments happened, your strategies, SPIF code, the CCP codes, what CSAP strategies were used, and then the participant descriptions. And it's not funding source, but it is sector type. So it's just a review of what sectors, community sectors were engaged in your accomplishments that month. And I will definitely get the reports out to the workstation by the 15th of every month. And there is a quick check in those reports that if you scroll to the notes section, you'll be able to click on the link that says quick check, and that's where we'll review those questions here in a minute. The monthly reports are basically just the story of how your accomplishments progressed, and if you compare like the first report to the last report, you'll be able to see how much progress happened. And if you put all the reports back to back to back, you'll get the story of how everything came to be and how you were able to change your community and make a difference. So just as an example, 1 month there might be a meeting with stakeholders about getting a school policy changed. And so that would be a developmental action or developmental activity. That would be capacity, just kind of talking about it. And then the next month you set up a meeting with the superintendent of schools or a representative from our Congress, and you set the meeting for the following month. So that's another developmental activity. And then the next month you have the meeting with the representative or person to make the change. That would be a community action. So we see how it's all leading up to being able to finally having the school change the policy and enacting that change in the community. And you can set all of these progress reports side by side and be like, this is what we accomplished, or this is what we accomplished. This is how we accomplished it. And think of all the different opportunities you can use that information for. Going into the next slide. I did have a example report just to go through. And if you'll click on the link, Lisa, it should take us to, I believe, one of the last reports from the last month, just as a quick little example. Maybe. There we go. So yeah, this is just an example from August. CKF had 9 accomplishments that month. So you'll be able to see if you click on the different like headers in the report, it'll take you to, if you scroll down to the second page, Lisa. If you click folder, it'll take you to the graphs folder of your organization or coalition, and you'll be able to view those all the graphs in the folder as just an overview. If you click accomplishment, it'll take you straight into the accomplishments graph.
Do you want me to demonstrate that, or we?
That's fine. I was just going to do a quick little overview of the report, just pointing that out. That's what your overall accomplishments look like. So you can see those accomplishments happening over the course of the month in each week. And then scrolling to say the first accomplishments, there wasn't any first time accomplishments. That happens. Not every accomplishment is going to happen for the first time. Going into the evidence-based strategies, you can see that CKF utilized different strategies that month for both media awareness and prevention education. And then kind of going into the next, SPIF phase. You'll be able to see, I do have these tables provided for SPIF phase and CSAP. So if you're ever questioning something in the graph, you can always review the chart and like look at the definitions, and if there's any question on anything in the monthly reports ever, don't hesitate to email me, Dola, any of the evaluative team on any questions. But yeah, these reports are supposed to tell the story of what happened that month. And so you'll be able to see how, say at the beginning of the month, you had a developmental activity, and at the end of the month, you had a services provided. And being able to see the accomplishments grow and seeing how they progress through the different phases and like CSAP and SPIF, and seeing like evidence-based strategies you utilize that month, seeing how many participants you engaged, see how many sectors you were able to engage that month. So that's how the reports read. And I have little report notes under each graph to just kind of describe what's in the graph. Yeah, that's what the reports look like. And then if you'll scroll all the way to the notes section, Lisa.
Nice one.
Yeah, definitely a lot of sectors engaged and a lot of participants engaged that month. So that's awesome. So this is the notes and next steps section. This is where you, I have linked the strategy action plan. Planning grantees, you do not have a strategy action plan yet, so don't worry about that. But for the implementation grantees, I have linked the strategy action plan. And that's just to compare what's in the action plan to what happened that month. And then in the next paragraph, you'll have the quick check link, and then you'll click on that and we'll go back to the PowerPoint where we'll talk about some of those questions. And these are just the questions that are in the quick check. They're just to make sure that everything is on track for you guys. And if you need any help, this is a kind of an indicator if there's any help needed, to make sure that you guys are in contact with everyone in the KPC as much as possible. So nothing falls through the cracks and everything is sustainable and progresses. Does anybody have any questions on the monthly reports? Awesome.
Thanks, Shelby. And I'll just mention, we added this quick check question kind of in to your benefit of not having to duplicate information that was formally in a quarterly report. We're able to pull all that now, so reducing the concepts of having a quarterly report but there were some questions that weren't being answered in any other way. So that's why we pulled these out for you to complete in the link each month, be specific about some of the contextual factors. I think that's important because, you know, those things, these are things that can make big changes and not have, and you don't want to wait a whole quarter to find out what those are, because they can impact implementation so much. And then just a quick checkbox on yes or no on those, and then if there was, what the impact was. And then, as Shelby said, have you had any let us know what TA needs you need or what other things you might need help with. Thanks, Shelby. That was a great overview. I think we're going to continue on here. If there aren't any other questions for Shelby or Dola right now. We're not going to spend a lot of time today, but we're going to talk, you've been talking about understanding data now, but also talking a little bit about data quality, but also making connections between data. Here, you know, we've been trying to stress the connection between that process data, that community checkbox data, and the outcome data that you report for tracking your goals and objectives with the KCTC data and others in the young adult survey. And really, we've been able to show, you know, through our KPCCI cohort groups over time, that as the number of those prevention related activities go up in the community, youth substance use goes down, and it goes down typically at a faster rate than just the state average of people that are not implementing strategies, prevention strategies in their community. So that relationship really is evidence between the connection between those two data, what's happening in your action plan that you're reporting into the CCB, and then the outcomes that you're actually achieving. So there's a real connection that we like to stress. And as we're talking about data, we're just going to briefly talk about data quality, noting that not all data are created equal. So in order to be useful, we have to look at two measures. One is validity and one is reliability. We need data to be useful. You need to be using data that's measured more than one time. It should be collected in a standard way with consistent protocols. Data must be accurate and reflect the group that you're trying to represent. So there's two ways we typically think about data quality, and that's through validity and reliability. Validity basically refers to truth in measurement, or ensuring that the data is accurate and measures what it's intended to measure. So data validation is intended to provide guarantees for fitness, accuracy, and consistency. So is it valid? Is it true? There's different kinds of validity. There's internal validity and external validity. We don't really need to go into that now, but it is important that data is valid, and it's also important that data is reliable. So here we're talking about the consistency of measurement over time, the degree to which questions used, for example, in a survey procedure, the same type of information each time is used under the same conditions. And we talk about this because it's important. We focus on producing strategy plans for preventions, but we have to make sure that the data we're using is high quality, because that's the data that will be used to make decisions and plans for the future. And so that's kind of why we stress, if you remember in orientation and each year, if you don't have 60% KCTC data, we ask that you create a KCTC action plan that talks about how you will work to try to increase participation or get better data, because that high quality data and outcome data is so important for this process. And just one more quick thought on this, one more quick slide. This slide provides a good visual of the differences between validity and reliability and the importance of both. So let's think of the arrows as different communities, documentation, and the community checkbox. So in the first bullseye, you can see that maybe this particular coalition documented some activities, but not others. So it's not very consistent, meaning it's not reliable, but it's also not meeting that bullseye, that center target. So it's not really valid or accurate. So perhaps they didn't fully describe what happened. They don't provide full documentation of the who, what, with whom, why, and when. The second bullseye is reliable and consistent, but it's not on target. It's not very accurate. It's not very valid. So finally, that third bullseye shows a coalition who's measuring and documenting accurately and consistently over time, hitting the target each time in its intended place in the bullseye. So that would be reliable and valid. I just like using that as a visual as we're talking about the differences between them. So some things to keep in mind as we're talking about the data too, particularly for your KPCCI grant. Just like KDADs, you need to be doing assessment and annual reassessment. You get new outcome data every year. You're getting monthly data from your CCB every month, and these reports. We're providing new reports. So you need to be regularly looking at data and reassessing. So with your KPCCI support team and your coalition, review the progress towards your goals and objectives. So when you get your new reports, or when you announce that new data is out, you say, okay, this is the rate we have now. This is what we said we wanted. Are we meeting that goal? Are we meeting our targets? What adjustments do we need to make? And then get with your KU folks and do sense making. And I think that's scheduled for at least twice a year. And they're always available for questions. Review monthly the CCB progress reports, monitor strategy implementation. So look and see, are we getting the results we want? If we're not getting the results we want, what changes need to be made? Maybe that strategy just isn't going to work in our community. Maybe we look at a different strategy or a different way of interacting or reaching people. So it's a constant. Remember that spiff, pinwheel, or circle or cycle. It is a constant. You get through the steps and you go back and circle again. You're always reassessing and replanning and implementing, and it's kind of that continual process. So just wanted to have you keep that in mind. And I think we're now to the final section of our training, actually. And we're going to talk about, Dola's going to talk to you about using data to tell your story. The data you're collecting is actually telling your story. And think about what makes for a good storyteller. You know, they know their audience, they understand the message, and they use data in different ways to communicate with people and support that message. So I'll turn it over to Dola now.
Thank you, Lisa. You would go to the next slide. So knowing your audience, you have heard us talk about Congress, federal reports, NOMS, the state, the monthly reports. Those are all different audiences. And so you want to, you wouldn't take information from the National Outcomes Measures report and share it with your coalition members unless they were just, top notch. Not to say that they're not top notch, but unless they're like us and get all smiley and giggly when it comes to numbers and how things work together. So you really want to look at what type of data you're sharing. We're going to start with the monthly report. I know you're getting a monthly review of what you're doing. And so taking the monthly report to your coalition meeting and reporting back, because I'm sure you have responsibilities to measure back to your community and back to your coalitions or your, if you have an organization that's managing your funding for you, probably they want to know, well, how are we advancing? What are you doing? Are we staying in alignment with the contract that we signed? So that's one way to use your data from your monthly report. Another way to use it is if you are engaging new sectors. If you are in a new school and the school wants to know, well, what is it that you're doing? We understand, most people understand what your issues are, your risk and protective factors are that you're addressing in your community, but they may not know how it is that you're doing it. So the more accurate your accomplishments are entered into the community checkbox, the higher the likelihood that you can pull some of that data. And I say you pull some of that data. That's a training that we promise often, and hopefully next year we'll get to it. But definitely, you can always ask Shelby or I. Just tell us what it is that you're looking for. We'd be more than happy to pull a graph for you specific to your needs. And so, Lisa, I've probably gotten ahead of myself. Will you go to the next slide? So basically what we wanted to hone in there is knowing your audience, and then why. Tell people about your evaluation findings. You can go through all of those, raising awareness, attracting resources, sharing your success. That's a big one. They're all big ones. Promoting registration, lobbying for ordinances, or program changes, providing accountability. I talked a little bit about that, and creating a name for your initiative. So if people don't know, you don't want to be the best kept secret, in town, and you don't want to, put the issues that you're addressing under the carpet either. So taking that, not just the information from the CCB, but being able to compare your outcome data to your process data is another way to use both the data that you get from Greenbush. And then, so, here's the problem. This is what students in schools, wherever the surveys are coming from are saying, and this is what our coalition is doing to address those. And that's what you're going to get out of the CCB. You can also use your plans, your action plans, and your logic model. That's a part of your evaluation process. Sharing that, people like to see, a process. Well, we see what it is the data is saying. We see how you're going to do it, but what did you do? What steps are you taking to get there? Especially if you are trying to attract resources, that's going to be information that'll be important for you to have. You can go to the next slide, please. We talked a lot about this already, considering your message and your audience. We talked about verifying your facts. You've done that when you're looking for your different data sources, how to narrow it down. I think when it's talking about deciding on the layout, so, what does your presentation look like? Is it going to be a Word document, with a graph in it, depending upon your audience? Is it going to be a full PowerPoint presentation? What is that going to look like if you're talking to youth? Maybe it's going to be neither. It's going to be some of those images that we saw earlier about dropping the F-bomb. You're going to just have some just really powerful messaging, but then having powerful messaging for youth, but then having data to back that powerful message up. So considering that, citing your sources, and explaining what the facts mean if necessary. I won't run through all of these, but these are various ways where you can use data and how you can use data. Kind of went over that just a few moments ago. Having the report yourself, like in an interview, being able to go back and look at your reporting information, to use that information in an interview, brochures, just, that's the gamut. I won't read all of that for you, but anytime you want to say, we have this graph, we have this outcome data, how can we best show it and share it in our community? Any of us will be able to help support you in that. So at the end of your cohorts, at the end of your community's funding cycle, the KPC grantees are asked to provide a grantee presentation. We want to see your data in that presentation. We always get beautiful accounts about the history of your coalition. I always learn a lot about the state of Kansas through those fun facts about your community, but then using your data about how your funding, because you receive funding to implement those strategies, regardless of what they are. We have the data that shows that you adequately use your funding. So being able to do that, again, your process and your outcome measures, and then of course data from the CCB, which would be the process measures, but also inclusive of your outcome measures from Greenbush, which it says there what speeding away. Sorry. So just capturing the whole process of what you're doing in your grantee presentation would be important. And then you can take that presentation. I always think when I say you can take that on the road, but basically, you can take that and share it in different spaces, and you would be surprised at what people are interested in and how you can share your information. And I certainly don't want to leave out gathering that information and keeping it in one place so that when you're ready to write a grant, you're not reaching all over the place. It's all there in different reporting ways so that you can answer those various funding questions in various ways, and answering them from the perspective of which audience it is you're writing to receive resources from. So knowing your audience is not just how you are presenting it to information. I'm sorry, how you're presenting the information to others, but also how you're responding, right, from various sources. And so we can go to the next slide. And these are evaluating strategies. We're going to, this is our wrap up document. So again, evaluation will differ by type of strategy implemented. Always keeping in touch with your evaluation team that's inclusive of your DECA specialists. The one thing I really like about the KPC is that we work as a team. So, you know, your DECA specialists are your probably your main point of contact, but we all work together. Also, in evaluating your strategies, reporting activities, and your measures, that's the CCB, the community checkbox, Shelby and I. And so we can go on to the next bullet. Monitoring your data, we've talked about that. Ensuring implementation fidelity to programs and action plans. Reviewing your monthly CCB reports. Review progress towards goals and objectives as new data becomes available. And what you'll note, you'll see all of these different bullets. You know, don't be like, oh, I have all this to do. If you are entering your data into the CCB with fidelity, and with fidelity is answering the description, who did what, when, you know, why, and what was the result. And if you can go back, if you're going back to your logic model and your action plan, you're consistently in communication with your DECA specialists and any of us on the evaluation team. This is going to happen just by nature of that. So it's not like, you know, you're going to have to learn a specific skill for each of those areas. As long as you're implementing, doing what you said you would do, then it's going to happen for you. And it'll help you be prepared to share your progress with stakeholders. Don't leave the young people out at your schools when you're reporting back what it is that you've done. They're interested. You have youth coalition groups or youth leadership groups. Them having that data is important as well. So don't leave them out. Next slide. So any questions? Or we welcome any discussion based on anything we shared. I do want to say again that we will have a more in-depth community checkbox training coming up. And so, Lisa, I'll turn it back over to you. I don't know if there are any questions, or I don't see anything in the chat.
We have an evaluation link here. Let's see, Melissa, could you put that in the chat for us, please? And we would like for you to, this kind of wraps up our training, and I'm happy to say that we're done earlier than we had scheduled. I hope that doesn't upset anyone, but you get a little bit of time back just in time for lunch. But we would like for you to take a few moments and go ahead and if we can get that in the chat, go ahead and provide us some insight on what areas we covered well, what areas there's new areas that, you know, we need to cover again, but give us some feedback so that we can do so we can practice what we preach and look at the information provided and improve our training for the next time that we all get together and get to opportunity to talk and learn and discuss more about evaluation. So that really is helpful. We really do look at them and try to make adjustments based upon your feedback. So we would appreciate that. Thank you very much for attending. Any closing remarks, any closing questions, any closing needs? Remember, we're all going to be gathering again on October 11th, and we'll have some more information for you then, I think, regarding, again, reiterating the new information regarding fentanyl and possibilities for that, but also as we're learning about behavioral health disparities and cultural competence. So any final remarks?
Melissa has her hand raised.
Yeah.
I was just going to ask Dola, can you hang on for a minute after everybody leaves so I can ask you about that comment in the chat box?
Absolutely.
Follow up on that.
Heather, would you allow us to stay on for a moment?
I don't have privileges anymore,
Oh, well,
but I think you might.
I
do.
just won't close it. I think I'm actually sharing or hosting, so that'll be fine. All
Okay.
right, we won't hold you any longer. Thank you for your time and your attention. Don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions, and we'll talk to everybody soon. Have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. So Dola, like I said, I'm pretty sure I used hours instead of minutes, but I've
Okay.
slept since those entries, but I'm pretty sure that I did hour, or, like if it was 4 hours long, I think I put a 4 versus, 120 or 280 or whatever that is. It's
Oh,
noon. I should be able to do math, but I'm not able to right now.
It's
Anyway, is it worth going back over those 2 months worth of data and trying to update that, or do we just make sure that it's accurate moving forward? Like, what's the best way to handle that?
I think we should look at the entries together. Maybe let's set up a TA session and review them. What community are you with?
Montgomery County.
Yeah.
And I don't know how many I've made. I've probably made 7 entries or so before, after our community mobilizer left. So it's not a huge quantity of them, but I'm
No.
pretty sure that I did it wrong.
If
So that would be,
if it's just 7, if it's under 10, you're more than welcome to go back and make the changes and let us know you made the changes. If it's more than that, then maybe we should look at it together.
I'm pretty sure I've made less than 10, but I've never gone through an edited one either. So if I can bumble through that, then I'm fine with that.
I don't want you to bumble through it. Let's close this out. Shelby will reach out to you and do a TA session with you. She can show
Perfect.
you how to edit it. Will that work, Shelby?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I'll
Yeah.
reach out to you, Melissa, and see what time works the best for all of us.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Have a great rest of your day.
Let's keep our team on here for just a minute if we can too.
Yeah, I just got an email in like the last 5 minutes. Don't know if anybody's aware yet, but apparently the Marion County grant mobilizer quit with no forewarning. So their CCB entries might look a little funky for the next couple months.
Are you talking about Erin?
Was she the grant mobilizer?
I thought she was, but had been announced. I don't know if there's someone else that left. Did it tell you who?
It doesn't mention any specifics, but Terry's the one that emailed me.
I think he was just updating you. I think it's
Okay.
All right.
So many. This has been a weird
Has the
year.
recording stopped?
Oh no. Hold on, sorry. I'll ask Paul to are you sure you want to stop the recording? Yes.